I'm Emily Whitlock, 34, a U.S. cultural ambassador to South Korea, who thought I'd mastered the art of compartmentalizing until I opened our routine visa application file and saw two names that made my blood turn to ice: Richard and Carol Whitlock, my parents. The same parents who abandoned me at Seoul Station 20 years ago, posting selfies from their comfortable suburban life while I learned to survive on kimchi and the kindness of strangers. They didn't know I'd thrived. They didn't know I'd become fluent in Korean, earned scholarships to prestigious universities, or risen through diplomatic ranks. And they certainly didn't know that their abandoned daughter was now the gatekeeper to their desperate request to attend my sister's wedding. The embassy on this Tuesday morning felt like any other. Coffee brewing in the break room, Agent Rachel Martinez arguing with someone over the phone about processing delays, the gentle hum of Seoul traffic filtering through reinforced windows. I was reviewing routine B1, B2 visa applications, the kind of paperwork that usually required minimal attention. Business travelers, tourists, family visits. Standard stuff that I could process in my sleep after 8 years in diplomatic service. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Then I turned to the next file and everything stopped. Richard Whitlock, 58, businessman from Westfield, Connecticut. Carol Whitlock, 56, retired educator. Emergency visa request for family wedding in Seoul. Attached was a handwritten letter on cream-colored stationery, the same stationery my mother had used for thank you notes when I was young. To whom it may concern, it began, we're requesting emergency processing for our visa applications to attend our daughter Stephanie's wedding in Seoul on November 15th. This is a once-in-a-lifetime family event, and we have already made non-refundable travel arrangements. We have strong ties to the United States and will return immediately following the ceremony. We are responsible citizens who have never violated any immigration laws. The words blurred as my hands began to shake. Responsible citizens, strong ties, family event. I locked my office door and called Ambassador Harrison's assistant. Something's come up, I managed. I need to leave early today. My voice sounded normal, professional even, but inside I was 14 again, standing in the same city with $200 and a student visa that was about to expire, watching my parents disappear through airport security. The panic attack hit me like a freight train. 20 years of carefully constructed stability crumbled in seconds. I gripped my desk, trying to breathe, trying to think, but all I could see was that handwritten note they'd left me at Seoul Station. Emily, sweetie, this is for the best. You're smart and resourceful. We know you'll figure it out. Love, Mom and Dad. No phone number, no return address, no mention of when or if they'd come back for me. Now they wanted emergency processing to see their daughter's wedding. Their daughter. Not me, Stephanie. The golden child who'd received everything I'd been denied, their presence, their support, their love. The daughter whose college fund had been more important than my return ticket home. I stared at their current address, the same house in Westfield where they'd packed for our cultural exchange trip to Korea, the same house they'd returned to without me, the same house where they probably told neighbors I was studying abroad instead of admitting they had abandoned their 14-year-old daughter in a foreign country. The irony wasn't lost on me. 20 years ago, they'd left me powerless and alone in Seoul. Now I held their fate in my hands. One denial stamp, one bureaucratic delay, and they'd missed their precious daughter's wedding. The power reversal was so complete it felt almost surreal. But as I sat there, surrounded by the trappings of my hard-won success, my diplomatic credentials, my certificates of achievement, my photos with Korean officials, I realized this wasn't about power. It was about something much deeper. Something that had been eating at me for 2 decades, festering in the spaces between my professional accomplishments and personal relationships. I needed to go home. I needed to think. I needed to decide what Emily Whitlock, the abandoned child who'd become a cultural ambassador, was going to do with Richard and Carol Whitlock's desperate request to enter the country where they'd left her to die. The memories came flooding back as I sat in my Seoul apartment that evening, triggered by seeing their names in that familiar handwriting. I'd spent years in therapy learning to manage these flashbacks, but tonight they overwhelmed every coping mechanism I'd developed. I was 14 when they told me we were taking a family trip to Seoul, a cultural learning experience, they called it. Emily's always been interested in other cultures. She's taking Korean language in high school. This will be educational. What she didn't mention was that they'd already decided I wouldn't be coming home. The trip had started normally enough, though. We toured Gyeongbok Palace, ate at traditional restaurants, visited Myeongdong for shopping. Stephanie, then 12, complained constantly about the food, the language barrier, the walking. I was enchanted. Seoul felt alive in ways that Connecticut never had. The energy, the history, layered on modernity, the way ancient temples coexisted with glass skyscrapers. "You really love it here," my father had observed on our third day, and I'd nodded enthusiastically, not recognizing the calculation in his eyes. The trap had been set so carefully, I'd walked right into it.
On our last scheduled day, they'd taken me to Seoul Station. "We need to discuss something important," my mother had said, her voice strangely formal. We'd sat in a coffee shop overlooking the departure boards, and that's when they dropped the bomb. "Emily, sweetheart, we've been thinking," my father had begun. "You're so mature for your age, so adaptable. And you clearly love Korea. We can't afford to bring you home," my mother had added, her voice catching slightly. "The business has been struggling, and Stephanie needs stability for high school. Her SAT prep alone costs more than your return ticket." I had stared at them, not understanding. "What do you mean you can't afford it? We already have return tickets." "We had to cash yours in," my father had explained, "for Stephanie's college fund. But this could be an opportunity for you. You're so smart, so resourceful. You could learn the language properly, maybe get into Seoul National University. Think of it as an adventure." "An adventure?" I repeated, my voice getting higher. "You're leaving me here, alone?" "You'll figure it out," my mother had said, and I'd seen tears in her eyes, but not enough to change her mind. "You always do. You're our strong girl." They'd left me with $200, my student visa that expired in 3 months, and a promise to send money when we can. The promise had been as empty as their explanation. They'd walked away from me in that coffee shop, dragging their suitcases towards international departures, and I'd sat there for hours watching other families reunite, watching other children go home with their parents. I had followed them to the departure gate, begging, crying, promising to be better, to need less, to not be a burden. "Please don't leave me," I sobbed. "I'll do anything. I won't ask for anything else ever again." But my father had handed our boarding passes to the gate agent, 2 passes, not 3, and my mother had pressed a crumpled piece of paper into my hand. "Your student housing information," she'd said, "the address for the language program. You'll be fine." I'd watched their plane taxi away from the gate, taking my childhood, my security, my belief that parents protected their children no matter what. The first night was the worst. I'd found my way to the language program dormitory, but they had no record of extended enrollment for me. The program was only supposed to last 2 weeks, the length of our family trip. The coordinator, a kind woman named Ms. Park, had let me stay one night while she tried to figure out what to do with an abandoned American teenager. I'd called the U.S. Embassy the next morning, terrified but determined. The official I'd spoken to had been sympathetic but firm. Without evidence of abuse or immediate danger, and with my parents claiming I was in an educational program, there was little they could do. My parents had covered their tracks well. That second night, I'd slept in a 24-hour internet cafe in Hongdae, using my precious dollars to buy ramen and computer time to send desperate emails to relatives back home. None of them had responded. I'd learned later that my parents had told everyone I'd chosen to stay in Korea for educational opportunities. I'd been surviving, barely, for 3 weeks when Mrs. Kim found me. Mrs. Kim Soo-jin had become my mother in every way that mattered, and as I sat in her small apartment in Hongdae, the day after discovering my parents' visa application, surrounded by photos of my graduations and achievements that my biological parents had never witnessed, I finally let myself break down completely. "Emilia," she said softly, pulling me into her arms as I sobbed, "tell Halmony what happened." Mrs. Kim was 64 now, her hair completely silver, but her embrace still felt like the safest place in the world. Her apartment was exactly as I remembered from my teenage years. Traditional Korean furniture mixed with modern conveniences, walls covered with my school certificates and photos, the smell of jasmine tea and love filling every corner. "They're here," I managed between sobs. "My parents. They want visas to come to Seoul for Stephanie's wedding." Mrs. Kim pulled back to look at me, her weathered hands cupping my face. "The ones who left you? They dared to come back here?" The story poured out of me, finding their application, the memories it triggered, the impossible position I found myself in. Mrs. Kim listened without judgment, occasionally making small sounds of disgust or comfort, her presence anchoring me as it had for 20 years. When she finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Do you know," she finally said, "I wrote them letters for the first 5 years after I found you. I wrote to every address I could find, telling them their daughter was safe, that she was brilliant, that she missed them." My heart stopped. "What?" Mrs. Kim stood slowly and moved to an old wooden chest. From it, she pulled a manila envelope thick with papers. Every letter came back unopened, returned to sender. They didn't want to know. She showed me letter after letter, all in her careful English, describing my progress in school, my language achievements, my college acceptance. 20 years of a mother's pride and desperation, trying to bridge the gap my parents had created. All returned, unread. This is why I told you to take American name for university applications. Not Kim Emily, like family name. Emily Whitlock, like them. Because maybe someday they would want to know their smart daughter. Maybe they would be proud. The weight of her sacrifice hit me like a physical blow. Mrs. Kim had loved me enough to keep my parents' name, had hoped for my reconciliation with them even after they'd abandoned me. She'd raised me with traditional Korean values of family honor and respect, while my actual family had violated every principle she'd taught me. "Halmoni," I whispered, using the Korean word for grandmother that I'd called her since I was 15. "Why didn't you tell me about the letters?" "Because you were healing," she said simply. "And because I hoped maybe someday they would come for you with love, not with need." She poured us tea, the ritual giving her time to compose her thoughts. "When I found you at Seoul Station, you know what I thought? I thought of my Mina." Mrs. Kim's daughter had died in a car accident 10 years before she found me. She had been 14, my exact age when my parents abandoned me. Mrs. Kim had never had other children, had never remarried after her husband's death. Finding me had been a kind of miracle for both of us. "I was so angry at parents who could throw away such precious gift," she continued. "My Mina, I would have given anything for one more day. But these people, they threw away living daughter like garbage. I could not understand." "You saved me," I said, meaning every word. "No, Emilia, you saved yourself. I just gave you place to be safe while you grew strong." But that wasn't true, and we both knew it. Mrs. Kim had done everything for me. She'd convinced the language school to let me work in exchange for continued enrollment. She'd helped me navigate the visa extensions that let me stay legally. She'd taught me Korean customs and language until I spoke without an accent. She'd celebrated every good grade, comforted me through every nightmare, and had somehow scraped together the money to help me apply to universities when my test scores earned me attention from admissions officers. When Seoul National University offered me a full scholarship, Mrs. Kim had cried harder than I had. When I'd graduated summa cum laude, she'd worn traditional hanbok to the ceremony and burst with pride. When I'd gotten my first job at the embassy, she'd cooked for 3 days straight to celebrate. She'd been my family in every way that mattered. Now, as I looked at the photos covering her walls, my life documented in moments my biological parents had never cared to witness, I felt the full weight of what I'd lost and what I'd found. They want emergency processing for their visas, I told her quietly. I could deny it. I could make them miss the wedding. Mrs. Kim was quiet for a long time. What would that give you, Emilia? Justice, I said immediately. They abandoned me here. Now they need permission from me to enter the country where they left me to die. And after they miss wedding, after they hurt, what then? You still have same pain in your heart? I wanted to say yes, that revenge would heal something in me, but Mrs. Kim knew me too well. She'd raised me to think about consequences, to consider not just what I could do, but what I should do. I don't know, I admitted. Mrs. Kim reached across to squeeze my hand. Then maybe you should talk to Dr. Grace first, before you decide anything. But Emilia, her voice grew serious. Whatever you choose, choose for your healing, not for their punishment. You have built beautiful life. Don't let their poison spoil what you have grown. As I prepared to leave, Mrs. Kim pulled me close one more time. You know I am sick now, yes? My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Cancer, she said matter-of-factly. Stomach. Maybe 6 months, maybe year. So listen to Harmony carefully. Your parents coming here, maybe this is gift. Maybe this is chance to close wound properly instead of leaving it to fester. The thought of losing Mrs. Kim, of facing this decision without her wisdom, made my chest tight. But her words resonated. For 20 years, I'd carried the wound of abandonment. Maybe it was time to decide how I wanted it to heal. I had power now. The question was, what was I going to do with it? The next morning, I sat across from Ambassador Thomas Harrison in his corner office, surrounded by the mahogany and diplomatic flags that usually made me feel proud of how far I'd come. Today, they felt like set pieces in a play where I'd forgotten my lines. I'd requested this meeting under the pretense of discussing a quote-unquote potential conflict of interest in a visa case. But Harrison's sharp gray eyes saw right through my careful composure. You look like hell, Emily, he said bluntly, pouring coffee from the silver service his predecessor had left behind. And you've never once in 8 years asked to recuse yourself from a routine case. So let's skip the diplomatic dance and get to what's really going on. Ambassador Harrison had been my mentor since I joined the embassy as a junior cultural attaché. He was 62, a career diplomat who'd served in 12 countries and somehow maintained both his integrity and his sense of humor. More importantly, he was the closest thing to a father figure I'd had since arriving in Korea, and right now, I needed his wisdom more than his authority. There's a visa application on my desk, I began carefully. Family emergency situation. But I have personal history with the applicants. Personal history, Harrison leaned back in his leather chair. Emily, in my experience, when someone with your judgment and professionalism starts talking about recusal, the personal history is usually significant. Are we talking about former romantic involvement, business dealings, family connections?
The word family hung in the air like a challenge. I'd never told Harrison about my abandonment, about how I'd really ended up in Korea. My official biography listed me as an exchange student who'd fallen in love with Korean culture and decided to stay for university. Clean, simple, inspiring even. The truth was messier, more painful, and I'd learned long ago that successful people preferred inspiring origin stories to complicated ones. Family, I said quietly. My biological parents, Richard and Carol Whitlock. Harrison's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. I thought your family was in Connecticut. Didn't they support your decision to study here? The carefully constructed lie felt heavy on my tongue. That's not exactly accurate, sir. Then what exactly is accurate? So I told him. Everything. The cultural exchange trip that was really abandonment, the Seoul Station coffee shop where they'd left me, Mrs. Kim finding me sleeping in internet cafes, the returned letters, the fake story they'd told back home, the 20 years of silence. Harrison listened without interruption, his expression growing darker with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he set down his coffee and rubbed his temples. Jesus Christ, Emily. They abandoned you, actually abandoned you at 14 in a foreign country. Yes, sir. And now they want emergency visa processing to attend a family wedding? My sister's wedding, Stephanie, the one they chose over me. Harrison stood and walked to his window overlooking the Han River. You know, I've seen a lot of human ugliness in 30 years of diplomatic service. Wars, genocides, trafficking. But there's something about parents who abandon their children that hits differently. Maybe because it violates the most basic contract of human civilization. He turned back to me. I'm estranged from my own family, Emily. Have been for 15 years. My father was an alcoholic who made our lives hell, and my mother enabled him rather than protect us kids. When I finally cut contact, half the family said I was heartless, that blood was thicker than water. The other half said I was brave. I'd never known this about Harrison. In all our years of working together, through late-night crisis management and early morning briefings, he'd never mentioned family beyond the professional necessities. What made you decide to cut contact? I asked. When I realized I was spending more energy managing their dysfunction than building my own life. When I understood that forgiveness doesn't require ongoing relationship, and that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away. He sat back down, leaning forward intently. But your situation is different. They're coming to you. The power dynamic has completely reversed. That's what scares me, I admitted. I have the authority to approve or deny their visas. I could make them miss Stephanie's wedding. I could force them to face consequences for the first time in 20 years. But I don't know if that makes me an advocate for justice or just vindictive. Harrison was quiet for several minutes, considering. Emily, I'm going to tell you something that might surprise you. I think you should handle this case personally. Sir? Recusal is for conflicts of financial interest or when personal relationships might compromise professional judgment. But this isn't about compromised judgment. This is about you being uniquely positioned to make a decision that serves both professional standards and personal justice. The question isn't whether you can be objective, it's whether you can be strategic. Strategic how? You're not just Emily Whitlock, abandoned daughter anymore. You're Emily Whitlock, cultural ambassador, with the full authority of the United States government behind your decisions. If you approve them, it's an act of professional competence and personal strength. If you deny them, it's an act of professional competence and personal protection. Either way, you're the one with power now. The weight of his words settled on me. For 20 years, I'd thought of myself as the victim in this story. But Harrison was right. I wasn't that powerless 14-year-old anymore. I was a decorated diplomat with security clearance, language fluency, and the authority to make decisions that affected international travel. What would you do? I asked. That's not my call to make, but I will say this. Whatever you decide, document everything. If you approve them, document why. If you deny them, document why. And if you choose to confront them, his eyes gleamed with something between concern and approval, make sure you do it on your terms, in your territory, with your rules. You think I should confront them? I think you've been carrying this wound for 20 years, and sometimes the only way to heal is to lance the infection. But Emily, his voice grew serious. Do it for closure, not for revenge. Do it so you can finally put this chapter behind you and move forward without their ghosts haunting your success. When I left Harrison's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: the permission to feel angry. Not just hurt or abandoned, but righteously, justifiably furious at two people who committed an unforgivable act and never faced consequences for it. But Harrison's warning echoed in my mind. Closure, not revenge. Justice, not vindictive. The difference mattered, even if I wasn't sure I understood it yet.
I spent the next 3 days using every resource at my disposal to research Richard and Carol Whitlock's current lives. What I found made my stomach turn with a mixture of rage and dark satisfaction. They'd lived well, very well. While I'd been learning to survive on kimchi and rice, they'd been building a comfortable middle-class existence in Westfield, complete with the perfect family narrative they'd created to explain my absence. Their social media presence was extensive and revealing. Richard's LinkedIn showed a successful career progression from mid-level accountant to regional manager at a prestigious firm. Carol's Facebook was a catalog of maternal pride in suburban accomplishments: book club meetings, garden tours, volunteer work at the local historical society. But it was the family photos that cut deepest. 20 years of Christmas mornings, 20 years of birthday celebrations, 20 years of graduations, promotions, anniversaries, and ordinary Sunday dinners, all featuring the same 3 people: Richard, Carol, and Stephanie. I appeared in exactly 0 photos, not even in the throwback posts where normal families shared childhood memories. The narrative they'd constructed was seamless and calculated. In the comments section of a post from 2015 about Stephanie's college graduation, a family friend had asked, "Doesn't Emily live in Korea now? Is she still overseas?" Carol's response was a masterpiece of manipulation. Emily chose to stay in Seoul after her exchange year. She's always been so independent and adventurous. We're proud of her for following her dreams, even though we miss her terribly. Following her dreams. The euphemism was so perfectly crafted, I almost admired its audacity. They turned my abandonment into my choice, my survival into my preference, my pain into my adventure. I dug deeper, using embassy resources to access public records, tax filings, and financial documents. What I found was evidence of systematic deception that went far beyond social media performance. They'd claimed me as a dependent on their tax returns for 3 years after abandoning me, collecting benefits for a child studying abroad. They'd used my college fund, money my grandmother had left specifically for my education, to pay for Stephanie's private high school tuition. Most damning of all, they'd never reported me missing, never contacted Korean authorities, never filed any paperwork indicating concern for a minor child's welfare. As far as official records showed, I'd simply vanished from their lives without causing them a moment's worry. But the discovery that truly broke me came through a Korean government contact who helped me access immigration records. My parents had listed their return date as a family of 3 when they'd arrived in Korea 20 years ago. But when they departed, they'd changed their manifest to indicate they were traveling as a family of 2, claiming their 3rd family member was extending stay for educational purposes. They'd planned it from the beginning, every detail, every exit strategy, every lie they'd need to tell. The cultural exchange trip had been a carefully orchestrated operation to dispose of an unwanted child in the most legal way possible. The thought of their calculation, their cold-blooded planning, made me physically sick. But it also crystallized something important. This hadn't been a desperate decision made in crisis. It had been a calculated choice made by 2 people who'd weighed their options and decided their 14-year-old daughter was disposable. Agent Rachel Martinez found me in my office that evening, surrounded by printouts and files, my eyes red from staring at screens and crying. "Emily, you look terrible. What's going on?" Rachel was one of the few people at the embassy who knew pieces of my story. As a former military investigator and single mother herself, she understood family dysfunction in ways that my other colleagues didn't. I'd confided in her during late-night work sessions, sharing just enough of my background to explain why I had no family photos on my desk and why I spent holidays with Mrs. Kim instead of flying home. Remember how I told you my parents and I were estranged? Yeah, you said it was complicated family stuff. Why? I gestured to the files covering my desk. They want visas to attend my sister's wedding here in Seoul, and I'm the one processing their application. Rachel's eyes widened. Holy shit, what are you going to do? I don't know yet, but look at this. I showed her the tax documents, the social media posts, the immigration records. They've been lying about me for 20 years to everyone. Their friends, their neighbors, the IRS, probably even Stephanie. Rachel studied the documents with her investigator's eye. This is fraudulent representation to multiple government agencies. They claimed you as a dependent while you were self-supporting in Korea. That's tax fraud. I know. Emily, you could destroy them with this information. Criminal charges, financial penalties, social humiliation. These aren't just moral failings, they're actual crimes. The power I held was intoxicating and terrifying. I could expose their lies, reveal their fraud, shatter the perfect family image they'd spent 20 years constructing. I could make them pay for every year of my struggle, every night I'd gone hungry, every moment I'd wondered if I was worth loving. But as I sat there surrounded by evidence of their deception, I realized something crucial. I didn't want to become them. I didn't want to be someone who destroyed other people, even people who destroyed me first. Rachel, I said slowly, what if I told you that I'm going to approve their visas? I'd say you're either incredibly mature or completely insane. Why would you do that?
Because denying them won't give me what I really need. But approving them? That gives me the chance to face them on my terms, to make them look me in the eye and acknowledge what they did. You want to confront them. I want them to see who I became in spite of them. I want them to understand that their abandoned daughter is now the person who controls their access to the country where they left her to die. And I want them to know that when I grant them permission to enter Korea, it's not because I forgive them or because family obligations compel me. It's because I choose to show them the mercy they never showed me. Rachel stared at me for a long moment. That's either the most mature thing I've ever heard or the most elaborate revenge plot in diplomatic history. Maybe it's both. As I gathered the files and prepared to leave, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in days. I knew what I was going to do. More importantly, I knew why. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my narrative, taking back the power they'd stolen from me, and showing them, and myself, that Emily Whitlock, the abandoned daughter, had become Emily Whitlock, the woman who could face her past without being destroyed by it. But first, I needed to understand exactly what Stephanie knew about our family's history, because if I was going to orchestrate this confrontation, I needed to know who else might get hurt in the process. The video call with Stephanie was supposed to be a routine embassy verification. Standard procedure for wedding-related visa applications. I'd explained to her assistant when I'd requested the meeting. We just need to confirm some details about the ceremony and guest list. What I hadn't mentioned was that I'd been staring at photos of my sister for 3 days, trying to reconcile the 12-year-old who'd complained about Korean food with the poised woman planning an international wedding. Stephanie appeared on my screen at exactly 2 p.m. Seoul time, 1 a.m. Connecticut time. She was in what looked like a home office, wearing a silk blouse and pearl earrings that suggested she'd dressed up for our official call. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless despite the late hour. She looked successful, confident, and genuinely excited to be talking to someone associated with her Korean wedding plans. Miss Whitlock, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me. I have to admit, I'm a little nervous about all the international logistics. This is my first time planning anything this complicated. The irony of her calling me Miss Whitlock wasn't lost on me. We shared a last name, but she had no idea she was talking to her sister. It's my pleasure, Miss Whitlock. I understand you're having your ceremony in Seoul?
Yes, at the Sheila Hotel. My fiancé Michael is Korean American, and his family wanted a traditional ceremony. Plus, his grandmother isn't able to travel, so we decided to come here instead. It's actually quite romantic. Seoul is where Michael's parents met. I'd prepared for this conversation, had practiced staying professional and emotionally detached, but hearing Stephanie talk about choosing Seoul for love, for family connection, when Seoul was the city where our parents had abandoned me, was like a physical blow. That sounds beautiful, I managed. And I see your parents are requesting emergency visa processing to attend? Stephanie's face lit up. Yes, they're so excited. Mom's been planning her outfit for months, and Dad keeps joking about learning to use chopsticks properly. They've never been to Asia before, so this is a huge adventure for them. Never been to Asia? The words slipped out before I could stop them. Oh, well, not since Emily lived here. That was ages ago, though. Early 2000s, I think? I was just a kid. Stephanie waved her hand dismissively. Emily stayed after some kind of exchange program. She was always the adventurous one in the family. There it was, the lie they'd told her, polished smooth by 20 years of repetition. I watched my sister's face carefully, looking for any sign that she knew the truth. But her expression was completely guileless. She genuinely believed their story. "Your sister lives in Korea?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Well, she did. We kind of lost touch over the years. You know how it is with family. Everyone gets busy with their own lives." Emily was always super independent, even as a kid. She spoke Korean in high school, got really into the culture. When she had the chance to stay and study there, it made sense for her. The casual way she dismissed 20 years of separation was devastating. To Stephanie, my absence wasn't a mystery or a tragedy. It was just Emily being Emily, following her dreams in a way that was both admirable and slightly inconvenient for family gatherings. "Have you tried to reconnect with her? For your wedding?" Stephanie's expression shifted slightly, showing the first hint of discomfort. "I actually tried to find her on social media a few years ago, but you know how common the name Emily is, and I wasn't sure if she kept our last name or took a Korean name or what. Mom said she probably just wants her privacy. Some people aren't really into the whole family thing, you know?" The pain in her voice was genuine, and it complicated my anger in ways I hadn't expected. Stephanie had been hurt by my absence too, just differently. She'd been told her sister had chosen to leave and never return, that Emily Whitlock was someone who prioritized adventure over family connections. "But you'd want her at your wedding if you could find her." "Of course," she said immediately. "She's my sister." I mean, we weren't super close growing up. She was always more serious, more studious. I was the social butterfly, she was the bookworm. But family is family, right? I'd love for her to meet Michael, to see how happy I am.
The genuine warmth in her voice nearly broke me. This wasn't the spoiled golden child I'd imagined for 20 years. This was a woman who genuinely missed her sister and accepted her parents' explanation for why that sister had chosen distance over connection. "Can I ask," I said carefully, "what your parents have told you about why Emily stayed in Korea? The specific circumstances?" Stephanie looked thoughtful. "You know, they don't really talk about it much. I think it hurt them when she decided not to come home. Mom gets this sad look sometimes when Emily's name comes up. I think they feel like they failed somehow, like maybe if they'd been different parents, she would have chosen to stay close to family." The manipulation was so perfect, it was almost artistry. They'd convinced Stephanie that they were the victims of my choice, the parents who'd been abandoned by an ungrateful daughter. They'd painted themselves as sad and regretful rather than callous and calculating. "They seem to care about family very much," I said, testing. "Oh, they do. Dad always says family is everything. They sacrificed so much for me growing up. Private school, dance lessons, college tuition. They both worked extra jobs to make sure I had every opportunity. Sometimes I think they spoiled me a little because they felt guilty about Emily choosing to leave." The picture became clearer and more infuriating. They'd used my abandonment as justification for lavishing attention on Stephanie. My suffering had become the reason she deserved extra love, extra investment, extra everything. They'd turn their crime into their virtue. Stephanie, I said, impulsively, what if I told you that your sister Emily might be closer than you think? Her eyes widened with hope and confusion. What do you mean? Do you know something about her? Have you seen her name in embassy records? I came so close to telling her everything in that moment. The words were right there, desperate to tumble out. I'm Emily. I'm your sister. Our parents didn't sacrifice for your opportunities. They stole mine to pay for yours. They didn't lose me to wanderlust. They abandoned me at a train station when I was 14 years old. But looking at her hopeful face, her genuine excitement at the possibility of reconnecting with her sister, I realized that telling her the truth right now would be cruel. Stephanie was getting married in 10 days. She was planning what should be the happiest moment of her life. Learning that her entire family history was built on lies and abandonment would shatter more than just her wedding plans. I'm sorry, I said finally. I shouldn't have said anything. Sometimes embassy work makes you overly hopeful about family reunifications. Stephanie's face fell slightly, but she smiled. That's okay. It was nice to think about for a moment. Maybe someday Emily will decide she wants to reconnect. Maybe she'll see something about the wedding on social media and reach out. After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at the blank screen. Stephanie wasn't the enemy I'd imagined. She was another victim of our parents' lies, someone who'd spent 20 years believing her sister had chosen to abandon the family, rather than learning that the family had abandoned her sister. But that realization complicated everything. If I confronted our parents, if I forced them to acknowledge their crimes, Stephanie would learn the truth about her entire childhood. She'd understand that every opportunity she'd been given had been stolen from me, that every family memory she treasured was built on my erasure. Could I justify destroying her happiness to achieve my justice, or was there a way to get closure without collateral damage? As I prepared to leave for my appointment with Dr. Grace Kim, I realized that this decision was becoming about more than just Richard and Carol Whitlock. It was about what kind of person I wanted to be, what kind of justice I wanted to pursue, and whether healing required destruction or if there was another path forward. The power I held was intoxicating, but power without wisdom was just another form of abandonment. And I'd spent 20 years learning the difference between survival and growth. Now I needed to figure out the difference between justice and revenge. Dr. Grace Kim's office in Gangnam felt like a sanctuary as I poured out my conflicted feelings about the visa decision. Grace had been my therapist for 5 years, helping me process abandonment trauma and cultural identity issues. Her Korean-American perspective had been invaluable in helping me navigate both cultures without losing myself in either. Yamili, you're describing two different impulses, revenge and justice. Can you tell me the difference? I thought carefully. Revenge is about making them suffer the way they made me suffer. Justice is about them facing consequences for their actions. And which one serves your healing? The question hit harder than I expected. I don't know. I've spent 20 years building a life despite them. Maybe I don't need either. But you're here, which tells me you do need something from this situation. What is it? I need them to see me. Not the abandoned child they discarded, but the woman I became. I need them to understand that their decision to leave me in Seoul didn't destroy me. It created someone stronger than they ever imagined.
Grace nodded. That sounds like closure, not revenge. Closure is about completing an unfinished emotional transaction. It's about you, not them. We talked for an hour about my options, my motivations, and what I really wanted from this encounter. By the end of the session, my path was clear. I would approve their visas, but on my terms, in my territory, with my rules. I'm going to require an in-person interview, I told Grace. Standard embassy procedure for certain irregularities. They'll have to face me without knowing who I am beforehand. And then what? Then I'll tell them exactly who their abandoned daughter became, and I'll grant them permission to attend their golden child's wedding, not because I forgive them, but because I choose to show them the mercy they never showed me. 3 days later, I sat at my desk crafting the most important document of my diplomatic career. The visa approval notification was professionally neutral, but every word was chosen with surgical precision. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Whitlock," I typed. "Your B1/B2 visa applications have been approved pending completion of a mandatory in-person interview at the U.S. Embassy in Seoul. This interview is required due to irregularities in your family status documentation and must be completed before final visa issuance." I scheduled the interview for November 14th, one day before Stephanie's wedding. They would have no choice but to appear if they wanted to attend their daughter's ceremony. The timing was deliberate, close enough to the wedding that denial would mean missing it, but with just enough buffer to allow travel if I chose to approve them. Ambassador Harrison reviewed my work with professional interest. "Irregularities in family status documentation. That's beautifully vague. What irregularities are you referring to?" "Their dependent claims on tax returns for a child they abandoned, their entry and exit records showing discrepancies in family composition, their failure to report a missing minor to authorities." I handed him the file. "All legitimate concerns that warrant clarification." "And the interview?" "Will be conducted by me, in my official capacity, following all proper procedures. They'll answer questions about their family structure, their relationship with all their children, and their travel history to Korea." I met his eyes. "By the end of that interview, they'll understand exactly who Emily Whitlock became after they left her at Seoul Station 20 years ago." Harrison studied me carefully. "You're sure about this approach? Once you reveal yourself, there's no going back. This changes everything." "I'm sure. For 20 years, they've controlled the narrative about our family. They've decided what people know about me, about my choices, about my character. It's time for me to take that power back." November 14th arrived, gray and cold. Seoul wrapped in the kind of autumn drizzle that had reminded me of home during my first lonely months here. Richard and Carol Whitlock entered the embassy at exactly 2 p.m., dressed in their best clothes and carrying expressions of nervous confusion. They looked older than I'd expected, but not frail. Richard's hair was completely gray now, his businessman's confidence slightly dimmed by bureaucratic anxiety. Carol clutched her purse with white knuckles, her perfectly applied makeup unable to hide the worry lines around her eyes. I watched them through the security cameras as they checked in, submitted their documents, and waited in the sterile embassy lobby. They had no idea their abandoned daughter was observing them, preparing for a confrontation 20 years in the making. When they were escorted to interview room C, I took a moment to center myself. I was Emily Whitlock, cultural ambassador to the Republic of Korea. I was fluent in 3 languages, held advanced degrees from 2 universities, and had the full authority of the United States government behind my decisions. I was not the terrified 14-year-old they had left at Seoul Station. I entered the room with their file under my arm and my diplomatic credentials clearly visible. They looked up expectantly, probably expecting routine questions about their travel plans and financial status. "Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Whitlock. I'm Emily Whitlock, cultural ambassador. I'll be conducting your interview today." The recognition didn't hit them immediately. Carol smiled politely. Richard nodded respectfully. Then slowly, the implications of my name began to register. "Emily Whitlock?" Carol's voice was barely a whisper. "Yes," I said calmly, taking my seat across from them. "Emily Whitlock, your daughter, the one you abandoned at Seoul Station 20 years ago." The color drained from both their faces. Richard's mouth opened and closed silently. Carol's hands began to shake. "I believe we have some irregularities to discuss regarding your family status documentation," I continued, opening their file with steady hands. "Shall we begin?" The silence in interview room C stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I watched my parents' faces cycle through shock, recognition, fear, and finally a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. "Emily," my mother whispered, her voice breaking. "Oh my God, Emily,
We had no idea you were... How did I survive? I finished calmly. How did I build a life after you abandoned me in a foreign country with $200 and no return ticket? That's an interesting question, Mrs. Whitlock. Perhaps we should start there. My father found his voice first, reverting to the authoritative tone I remembered from childhood. Now wait a minute. We didn't abandon you. You chose to stay. You were old enough to make that decision.
I was 14, I said, my voice steady as steel. 14 years old when you told me in a coffee shop at Seoul Station that you'd spent my return ticket money on Stephanie's college fund. 14 when you walked away from me and boarded a plane back to Connecticut. You were mature for your age, Carol said desperately. You were always so independent, so smart. We thought you'd be fine. You thought I'd be fine. I opened their file and pulled out the documents I'd prepared. Is that why you claimed me as a dependent on your tax returns for 3 years after abandoning me? Because you thought I was so independent and fine? I slid the tax documents across the table. These show you collecting benefits for a dependent child studying abroad. The same child you left with no financial support, no housing arrangements, and no legal guardian. Richard's face flushed red. Those were administrative errors. You were told nothing. You committed tax fraud while your actual daughter was sleeping in internet cafes and learning to survive on kimchi because it was the cheapest food she could find. I pulled out the next set of documents. These are your social media posts from the past 20 years. Would you like me to read some of your comments about your adventurous daughter who chose to stay in Korea? The one who was too independent to come home for holidays? Carol started crying then, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity, of a woman caught in lies she'd been telling for so long she might have started believing them herself. We missed you, she sobbed. We always missed you. We couldn't afford... Stop. My voice cut through her tears like a blade. Do not sit in my embassy and lie to me about missing me. You never reported me missing. You never contacted Korean authorities. You never reached out to the American embassy to check on my welfare. Mrs. Kim wrote you letters for 5 years, telling you I was safe, that I was thriving, that I missed you. Every single letter came back unopened. I pulled out photocopies of Mrs. Kim's returned letters, the ones she'd shown me weeks ago. You didn't miss me. You erased me. You created a narrative where I chose to leave so you could justify abandoning me. Richard leaned forward, his businessman's instincts finally kicking in. What do you want, Emily? Money? Some kind of settlement? We can discuss. I want you to understand what you did. I leaned back in my chair, completely in control of this moment I'd imagined for 20 years. I want you to know that your abandoned daughter learned Korean fluently, that she graduated summa cum laude from Seoul National University on a full scholarship, that she speaks 3 languages, holds a graduate degree in international relations, and has spent 8 years serving her country as a diplomat. I pulled out my credentials, my awards, my commendations. I want you to know that the child you discarded became more successful than you ever imagined possible. Not because abandoning me was good for me, but because I had no choice but to become strong enough to survive what you did to me. Emily, please. Carol reached across the table as if to touch my hand. I pulled it back. Don't. You don't get to touch me. You don't get to claim credit for my success. You don't get to pretend this was anything other than what it was. 2 selfish people who chose their own comfort over their child's life. We were young, Richard said desperately. We made mistakes. People make mistakes. Mistakes? I stood up, my professional composure finally cracking. Forgetting to pick up milk is a mistake.
Abandoning your 14-year-old daughter in a foreign country is a crime. And for 20 years, you have faced no consequences for that crime. Until now. I walked to the window, looking out at Seoul, the city that had raised me when they wouldn't. I have the authority to deny your visa applications right now. One stamp, one notation in your files, and you miss Stephanie's wedding. You go home to Connecticut and explain to your friends and neighbors why you couldn't attend your daughter's ceremony. I turned back to face them. Is that what you want me to do? No, Carol whispered. Please, Emily, we'll do anything. We'll make it up to you somehow. Just please don't punish Stephanie for our mistakes. And there it was. Even now, even caught in their lies and faced with their crimes, they were thinking of Stephanie first. Their concern wasn't for me, wasn't for the pain they'd caused, wasn't for the justice they deserved. It was for their golden child, their perfect daughter who might be hurt by their actions. You're right about one thing, I said quietly. Stephanie shouldn't be punished for your crimes. She's innocent in this. She genuinely believes your lies about me choosing to stay in Korea. She's been another victim of your manipulation. I sat back down and pulled out a fresh form. So, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to approve your visas. You're going to attend Stephanie's wedding, but you're going to do it on my terms. Relief flooded their faces, but I held up a hand. My condition is simple. You're going to tell Stephanie the truth. All of it. How you abandoned me, how you lied about it, how you've been lying to her for 20 years. You're going to do it before the wedding, and you're going to do it in my presence.
Emily, no, Richard said immediately. That will destroy her wedding. She doesn't need to know. She deserves to know that her entire family history is built on lies. She deserves to understand why her sister was never at family gatherings, why there are no photos of me in your house, why I chose to disappear from her life. You can't ask us to do that, Carol said. It will hurt her so much. Less than it hurt me when you left me at Seoul Station, less than it's hurt me every day for 20 years, and much less than it will hurt her when she eventually learns the truth from someone else. I signed their visa approvals with steady hands. You have 24 hours to tell her, or I revoke these visas and you miss the wedding. Your choice. And if we tell her, Richard asked, then you attend your daughter's wedding knowing that your other daughter, the one you abandoned, gave you permission to enter the country where you left her to die. Not because I forgive you, because I don't. Not because family obligation compels me, because you forfeited that right 20 years ago. But because I choose to show you the mercy you never showed me. I stood up. The interview officially concluded. There's one more thing you should know. Mrs. Kim Soo-jin, the woman who found me at Seoul Station and saved my life, will be attending Stephanie's wedding as my guest. She's the closest thing to a mother I've had for 20 years. When you meet her, you'll understand what real parents look like. They left the embassy in silence, clutching their approved visas like life preservers. I watched them through the security cameras, two broken people finally forced to confront the consequences of their actions. The next 24 hours passed in a blur. I met with Mrs. Kim to prepare her for the wedding, explaining what would happen and why. She held my hands as I talked, her eyes filled with pride and love. You did the right thing, Emilia. Not the easy thing, but the right thing. That's what real strength looks like. Dr. Grace called to check on me. Ambassador Harrison stopped by my office to offer support. Rachel brought me coffee and sat with me in comfortable silence. My chosen family, the people who'd supported me without being asked, rallying around me as I faced the biggest moment of my life. The call came at 6 p.m. Stephanie, crying so hard I could barely understand her. Emily? Is this really Emily? My sister Emily? Yes, I said softly. It's really me. They told me everything. Oh, God, Emily, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I believed them when they said you chose to leave. I'm so sorry I never looked harder for you. I'm so sorry they did that to you.
Stephanie, listen to me. None of this was your fault. You were a child too. They lied to both of us. Will you come to my wedding? Please. I know it's horrible timing and this is also messed up, but I need my sister there. I need you to meet Michael, to see that not all families are broken. The Shilla Hotel ballroom was elegant and understated, decorated in white and gold with touches of traditional Korean elements. Stephanie's family had embraced Stephanie completely, and their joy was infectious. Mrs. Kim wore her finest hanbok and commanded respect from everyone she met. Ambassador Harrison attended as my guest, proud to watch his protege navigate the most complex diplomatic situation of her career. My parents stayed in the background, subdued and ashamed. They'd told Stephanie everything, as promised, and now faced the consequences of 20 years of lies. Some of the wedding guests had heard whispers of the family drama, but Stephanie had asked everyone to focus on celebration rather than conflict. During the reception, Stephanie pulled me aside. "I've been thinking about what you said about chosen family. Mrs. Kim raised you, didn't she? She's your real mother." "She saved my life," I said simply. "When our parents abandoned me, she chose to love me. That's what real family does." "I want to know you," Stephanie said fiercely. "I want to understand who you are, what your life has been like, what you love and hate and dream about. I want to be your sister for real, not just in name." "I'd like that too." As the evening wound down, my parents approached me one final time. They looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of their exposed lies. "We're leaving Seoul tomorrow," Richard said quietly. "But before we go, we wanted to say, we're sorry. We know that's not enough, that it doesn't fix anything, but we are sorry." "For abandoning me or for getting caught?" Carol flinched. "For all of it. For everything we put you through. For the lies we told. For the family we broke." I looked at them for a long moment. These two people who'd shaped my life in the worst possible way and inadvertently made me stronger than I'd ever imagined possible. "I accept your apology," I said finally. "Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because carrying anger for 20 more years won't serve my healing. You'll live with what you did for the rest of your lives. That's consequence enough." 6 months later, Stephanie visited Seoul. We spent 2 weeks together, filling in 20 years of missed conversations, shared memories, and sisterly bonding. She met Mrs. Kim's extended family, learned to make kimchi, and fell in love with the city that had raised her sister.
"I understand now why you stayed," she said on her last night. "Not just because you had to, but because you found real family here. You found people who chose to love you." Mrs. Kim's cancer took her 8 months after the wedding. She died peacefully, surrounded by the family she'd chosen, and the daughter she'd saved. At her funeral, hundreds of people came to pay respects to a woman who'd spent her life choosing love over convenience, kindness over judgment. In her final letter to me, she wrote, "Emilia, you taught this old woman that family isn't about blood. It's about showing up, staying present, and choosing love even when it's difficult. You did that for me every day for 20 years. Now do it for yourself. Let yourself be loved by the people who see your true heart." I keep that letter in my desk at the embassy next to photos of Mrs. Kim, Stephanie, Harrison, and all the people who've chosen to be part of my life. My parents send Christmas cards now, formal and distant, but I don't respond. Some bridges are too broken to rebuild, and that's okay. Stephanie visits twice a year, and we video chat regularly. She's expecting her first child, a daughter she plans to name Grace, after Dr. Grace Kim, who helped me learn the difference between justice and revenge. Ambassador Harrison was promoted to Assistant Secretary of State, but before he left Seoul, he told me something I'll never forget. "Emily, you could have destroyed them with the power you held. Instead, you chose to free yourself. That's not just good diplomacy, that's profound wisdom. I still live in Seoul, still serve as cultural ambassador, still call Mrs. Kim's grave on holidays to tell her about my life.
I've dated, traveled, built friendships and professional relationships that fill my days with purpose and joy. Sometimes people ask if I regret staying in Korea, if I ever wonder what my life would have been like if my parents hadn't abandoned me. The answer is simple. I don't regret becoming the person I am. I don't regret the strength I developed, the perspective I gained, and the chosen family I found. My parents gave me one gift, though they never intended it. They taught me that love is a choice, family is earned, and the most powerful thing you can do is show mercy to people who don't deserve it. Not for their sake, but for your own. I'm Emily Whitlock, the abandoned daughter who became an ambassador. And I chose to show them that sometimes the best revenge is living well, loving deeply, and understanding that your past doesn't have to define your future. If you've ever been abandoned by the people who were supposed to love you, if you've ever had to build a family from the kindness of strangers, if you've ever held power over the people who hurt you, and had to decide what kind of person you wanted to be, I see you. Your story matters. Your choices define you, not their failures. And remember, the most powerful thing you can do is choose healing over hatred, chosen family over blood family, and your own peace over their punishment. Because in the end, the best justice is becoming someone so strong, so whole, so genuinely happy that their attempts to break you become the foundation of your greatest triumphs. 5 years later, I stand in the same Seoul Embassy office where this story began, but everything has changed. Ambassador Harrison's successor just approved my promotion to Deputy Chief of Mission. Stephanie's daughter Grace, my niece, babbles in Korean during our video calls, already bilingual at age 3. My parents send Christmas cards now, but we maintain careful distance. Some wounds heal into wisdom rather than reconciliation, and that's enough. Mrs. Kim's memorial garden blooms outside my apartment window. I tend it every morning before work, whispering updates about my life to the woman who taught me that family is a choice, not an accident. Yesterday, a 14-year-old American boy was found alone at Incheon Airport, abandoned by relatives who'd brought him on a vacation. The embassy called me first. As I drove to meet him, I thought about circles, closing, and beginning again. I introduced myself in English, then Korean. I'm Emily Whitlock, and I'm here to help. You're going to be okay, I promise. He looked up at me with the same terrified eyes I'd once carried, but unlike me 25 years ago, he wouldn't face this alone. He had someone who understood exactly what abandonment felt like, and more importantly, what survival looked like. Some stories end with revenge. Others end with justice. The best ones end with purpose. This is mine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.